Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter 2, contents of the Gita summarized, text number 71. Vihaya kamam yuk sarvam pumam charati nishpriha nirmamo nirahankara sashanti morigacchati. Please repeat. Vihaya, giving up, kama, material desires for sense gratification. Yaha, who, sarvan, all, puman, a person, charati, lives, nishpriha, desireless, nirmamaha, without a sense of proprietorship, nirahankar, without false ego, he, shantim, perfect peace, arigacchati, attains. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. A person who has given up all desires for sense gratification, who lives free from desires, who has given up all sense of proprietorship and is devoid of false ego, he alone can attain real peace. Purport: to become desireless means not to desire anything for sense gratification. In other words, desire for becoming Krishna conscious is actually desirelessness. To understand one's actual position as the eternal servitor of Krishna without falsely claiming this material body to be oneself, and without falsely claiming proprietorship over anything in the world, is the perfect stage of Krishna consciousness. One who is situated in this perfect stage knows that because Krishna is the proprietor of everything, everything must be used for the satisfaction of Krishna. Arjuna did not want to fight for his own sense satisfaction. But when he became fully Krishna conscious, he fought because Krishna wanted him to fight. For himself there was no desire to fight. But for Krishna, the same Arjuna fought to his best ability. Real desirelessness is desire for the satisfaction of Krishna, not an artificial attempt to abolish desires. The living entity cannot be desireless or senseless, but he does have to change the quality of desires. A materially desireless person certainly knows that everything belongs to Krishna. Ishavashamidam sarvam. And therefore he does not falsely claim proprietorship over anything. This transcendental knowledge is based on self-realization. Namely, knowing perfectly well that every living entity is an eternal part and parcel of Krishna in spiritual identity, and that the eternal position of the living entity is therefore never on the level of Krishna or greater than him. This understanding of Krishna consciousness is the basic principle of real peace. A person who has given up all desires for sense gratification, who lives free from desires, who has given up all sense of proprietorship and is devoid of false ego, he alone can attain real peace. So the question is, how is this to be done? And the answer is that the spirit soul must become strong. There's a word in the English language and other languages, especially those languages which have a lot of Latin roots in them. The word is virtue. Or we say someone is virtuous. Well, virtue, if you look in the English dictionary, it means good. To be virtuous means to be a good person. But if one goes back in history and traces out what the word used to mean in the Latin language, then it's very interesting because then one realizes and that actually there is a very direct connection to Sanskrit. So, to be virtuous, to have virtue in the ancient culture of the Mediterranean, ancient Roman civilization, and before that the Greek civilization. So to be a virtuous person meant to be a morally strong person. Those cultures, as you may know, ancient Greek and Roman cultures, they were very martial, very military oriented. And so to say a man was good was in that sense, in terms of that type of culture, very chivalrous culture with Kshatriya overtones. We don't want to say that they were actually Kshatriyas, because they were not actually following Vedic principles, at least from what we can understand from recorded history. Maybe before, it probably indicates that these European civilizations were settled by Kshatriyas who left India, either being driven out by Parashuram, or they were the descendants of the cursed sons of Maharaja Yati. Either way, they were fallen Kshatriyas. So that is there. But from what we know from the recorded history, they're not actually following Kshatriya Dharma, but they were very chivalrous, and in the Maleccha context, we would say, very noble, brave persons. So to be virtuous, to be good, was to be understood in those terms. And we see indeed this word virtue, the Latin root vir, means to be strong. And it means the same in Sanskrit. There is also a Sanskrit root vir, from which we get words like virya. So virya means to be very powerful, in particularly in a masculine sense. So this virtue, it comes out of a very masculine kind of military culture. So there's a clear correspondence. So virya, vir means to be strong. But now we're applying this sense of strength. It's not a question of being a man with big muscles and all of that, brave. But we're applying the sense of virya, virtue, strength or virtue, to be morally stout and strong, to the soul himself, spirit soul. And this was also done by the Greek philosophers, in the Platonic tradition, Socrates, Plato, and Neoplatonists. Actually, they made this point, that real virtue, real goodness, to be a really good person, can only mean to be spiritually strong, to be well established in one's spiritual identity, to know that I am not the body. And in Greek philosophy you have that very compelling example of Socrates. Just like also in the European religious history, you have the compelling example of Jesus Christ. So that's religion, and then in philosophy you have the compelling example of Socrates, who used to teach this about this same virtue of the soul. So Socrates, the story is that he was accused. There was a change in government. At first Socrates was very appreciated in Athens. But then there was a change, some revolution, some change in government. And the government became much more democratic, which meant all kinds of Shudras suddenly. Low-class people suddenly assumed governmental roles. And then the attitude towards Socrates changed, because they wanted to establish a kind of democratic ideal in their society. Everyone should do as the people do. And so the people had their sense of morality, which was, like today, very provisional. What you like to do, That's okay. What the majority thinks is right, that is right. So anyway, Socrates, he taught an absolute morality. Because he said, we're not these bodies. And our position in this world is only temporary. There's nothing absolute. There's nothing definite. You cannot establish a real morality, a real social system on just this body, the needs of this body. You have to come to the spiritual platform. And that is absolute. So he was teaching this with very firm conviction. And so they accused him of corrupting the youth, actually. So he was kind of like classified as a cult leader. See? Dangerous cult of Socratic knowledge. Misleading the youth. Which is very interesting when you consider, Greek culture, even of that time. Homosexuality was very prominent. We have this term symposium. There's even a book by Plato written, the Symposium. So symposium today means like a serious gathering of scholars to discuss some topic. But actually, from the Greek language, symposium, that word taken from Greek, it means a drinking party. So what they would do is they would get together and they would drink. They would also talk. They could talk about philosophy and things. But drinks were always going around. And finally they couldn't talk anymore because they were too drunk. And that would be the end of the symposium. So you see, that was Greek culture. Illicit sex, even 2,500 years ago, illicit sex, especially homosex, was quite prominent, and drinking, and of course the meat eating and all kinds of things. It was quite prominent then. So it's very interesting that Socrates was teaching very strict moral principles, no illicit sex. That was one of his firm principles. He spoke against that very often, especially homosexuality. He was against that. And he was against drinking, and he was against even meat eating. Himself was a vegetarian. These were the principles he taught. And philosophically, his fundamental principle was the eternality of the soul. And the soul should live in such a way as to go to God. He taught that also. And he also said that these words I'm telling you, they come from God, they don't come from me. They come from God within my heart. So this was Socrates. So it's very interesting that they would condemn him for misleading the youth. It's very ironic, and we are faced with the same. We all also scratch our heads in this modern world. We wonder, how is it possible for these people to accuse the Hare Krishna movement, the principles we're teaching, as being corrupting the youth? So Socrates had the same problem in this Mleccha culture. But as Prabhupada said, he considered Socrates to be Mukta Purush, a liberated soul. Why? Because he stuck to his principles. Prabhupada very much appreciated that. He said, although he had to take birth in such a low fallen culture, he stuck very firmly to the principle of I am not this body, I am spirit soul. So he was accused, and it was a big trial. Hundreds and hundreds of people were in attendance. And Socrates, because he was a brilliant speaker and a brilliant logician, and some of his arguments for the soul are they're just ingenious. And we can also use them in our preaching, the way he defeated the opposition. So anyway, he had to speak at his own trial. And so he refuted everyone's accusation. And he again argued the point of the spirit soul. But still, because it was a collective mob, and then of course in mobs there's a lot of agitation, just emotionalism. Doesn't matter if you say anything that makes more sense than everybody else. If the mob doesn't like you, as Prabhupada said, give the dog a bad name and hang him. That's their strategy. And by hook or by crook, call him a dog, give him a bad name, whip everyone up. That's also what they did to Jesus too. Whip everyone up. And no matter what you say, no matter how good you are, they'll still want to see you hung on the cross. Or in Socrates' case, to drink hemlock. That's how they used to dispose of the unwanted persons. They would be imprisoned, and then on some appointed day, they would be brought a cup of hemlock, which is poison, and they would drink it and die. But it so happened that the execution of the sentence, in Socrates' case, was delayed, and also the security in the prison he was kept. There wasn't even a prison, it was just a house. It was very lax. And the reason for this was that the fathers of Athens city, they thought, we don't really want to kill Socrates. That's not, After all, he did many good things in the past. So we put this sentence on him, and he'll escape. He'll go to some other city where he's more appreciated. There's other cities Greece was not united in those days, so they had city-states. So Athens was one city-state, and there was others. Another famous city-state was Sparta, and there were many others. So I thought, he'll, thinking of him as an ordinary man, with his friends, he'll escape one night, we'll look the other way, and then we'll be rid of him. He'll never come back because he's under death sentence. So, that's a tidy way of settling all. And actually his friends came to him, they knew this, and they came to him and said, Socrates, let's go. We've arranged everything. You can go, no problem. There's a place in another city. It's all set. You just come with us. He said, no. And he started to explain about, more or less he was telling them about the law of karma. and anyway, I have a mission, and my mission is dictated to me by higher authorities. My mission doesn't come to me from ordinary people like your conception of your mission in life. And I've already had a dream, and he described in this dream how a demigoddess appeared to him and said, come, meaning come to the place where this demigoddess resides. Come to me and come to this higher destination. So he said, I'm not afraid of anything. I'm not going to run away. If I ran away, then that would be a testimony to the whole world that I actually do not believe in what I teach. Because everyone will say, Socrates, in the end, he spoke so many big things about the soul, but in the end, he ran away to save his skin, like everybody else. So I'm not going to do this. So he stayed. And after a month or so, then the hemlock was brought to him. There was a month delay. He could have escaped, but he didn't. So the hemlock was brought, and he drank it, and he left his body preaching. He was preaching to them all. They were crying because his disciples were there, and they were crying, and he said, why you cry like foolish women? Don't you know? We're all spirit, soul, we're not this body. So rather than cry for me, you should cry for yourselves, because the fact that you're crying shows that you don't understand this, and you're all going to have to die too, whether drinking hemlock or not. So in this state, how will you face death? So this way he was preaching very nicely, and he gave up his body. So anyway, this is he's a virtuous man. So virtue, the original sense of virtue, to be good, is to be well established in the knowledge that I'm not this body. So actually this virtue, Socrates taught, virtue means this knowledge. Sophia is, like in philosophia. And Sophia means spiritual knowledge. So virtue or goodness means this knowledge. If one doesn't have this knowledge, then one cannot be good. Huh? So we find we can see a clear parallel to Krishna conscious philosophy. The spirit soul actually has his own transcendental qualities, which are not inherited from Mama and Papa, which you don't learn in the Swedish school, but they're actually there innately in the soul himself or herself. Actually, as Prakriti, we're all she, so we can say the soul herself, if you like. So these are transcendental qualities, these are 26 qualities of the Vaishnava. Or we can speak of, there are other enumerations, like the sixfold qualities of the sadhu. You know this, Titikshasha Karunika Subdridda Sarvadehinam Ajata Shatru Satatvam Sarava Sadhu Bhushanam. So these are 6 mentioned. And the Christians, coming out of the Neoplatonist tradition, they had seven virtues. Faith, hope, charity, prudence. There were 7. Anyway, so they're enumerated in different ways, but the idea is that these, when we speak of real virtue, you're speaking of the qualities of the soul. So then one who is in knowledge, who actually is aware, directly aware that I am not this body, then by that knowledge, these natural transcendental characteristics become apparent in him. He is spiritually strong. Means he's strong in that knowledge, I'm not this body. And thus he's good. That strength, that spiritual strength, that virtue makes him good. And good means, ultimately good means devotee. One, I probably uses the term nishta. Nishta. Actually, to be recognized as a good devotee, one must be on this platform of nishta. Nishta doesn't mean that one is, has attained higher intimate realization of his eternal relationship with Krishna in one of the rasas. But nishta means he's firmly situated. Firmly situated in what? In anartha nivritti, he is firmly conquered over his anarthas. Bhajana kriya, he's firmly situated in bhajan, in his devotional service. He's firmly situated in sadhusanga, association with devotees. He's firmly situated in shraddha, faith. Prabhupada uses this term, unflinching. And when you think of the word unflinching, then you can see again the very clear connection to virtue, the old meaning of virtue, virya, is strong. Because to flinch means to jump. In English language, like if someone comes up to you and puts their fist in your face, like, watch out. And they do this and you go like this, that's flinching. You see? To flinch means to jump out of some fright, some fear. So when Prabhupada says unflinching faith, then you get this sense, this virya, strong, tough. That means when Maya comes to tempt us away from anartha nivritti, from bhajana kriya, from sadhusanga, and from shraddha, from faith. And one does not flinch. One is very firm, strong. No, this is nonsense. So that is nishta. Nishta. And this nishta stage is actually the dividing line It's where one's material conditioning leaves off and one's actual spiritual life begins. Because what follows nishta is ruchi. Ruchi means the higher taste. And what follows ruchi is asakti, attachment. Firm attachment, this attachment to Krishna, Krishna's service. And then bhava, ecstasy, and then prema. So nishta is the dividing line. Yes, to be a good devotee then. A good devotee means to be on this nishta platform. One is unflinching in his devotional service. So he's firmly established in his first nature, his spiritual nature. He's firmly established on that side. Now we all have a second nature. What is the second nature? If I ask, everyone's going to say the material nature. But what does that mean? Think about it for a moment. Because we've established that we're spirit soul. So how can we speak of the material nature of the spirit soul? What does that actually mean? Does that mean some part of the spirit soul becomes material? Or what? So, Prabhupada explained, yes, we have first nature and we have second nature. Second nature. So we should understand this. Yes, the second nature is our material nature. But Prabhupada said habit is second nature. This is what it means to be conditioned by material nature. It doesn't mean that, as some theories have it, that the soul is somehow fundamentally dependent upon material nature. Like the Christians. The Christian theology is that the soul is distinct from material nature in one sense. But the soul cannot exist, or it cannot function in any way without material nature. The Christian, they have this concept like we do. The Christian theology is personal. And this is very interesting. They're personalists. But their concept of person, their concept of the whole person is body, mind, soul. These three must be together. Even we can agree with that, as long as it's not material mind and material body. The whole person, the true person, he is a soul, the jiva atma, with a spiritual mind and spiritual body. That's the real person. And that means the same common energy, spiritual energy is shared throughout by this whole person. His mind and his body are not in any way in conflict with the soul. But the Christian theologians, from the very beginning, have not had that concept, or when they did, it was condemned as a deviation, as a heresy. So that's why the actual Christian theology is this doctrine of the resurrection of the body. So anyway, I won't get into that. It's another subject you may find interesting. This is like the actual official Christian doctrine, resurrection of the body. On the grounds that the soul cannot do anything without a body. After you die, the body goes in the ground. Why? To keep it there. To keep it there. And there's never a good reason why they put the body in the ground. It's got to be there because in the future, of the last days, the trumpets will sound and the earth will open and these bodies will come out. And the soul, which was in some kind of suspended state, inactive state, just to kind of sleep, then that soul will be reunited with the body by God. And then that whole person will be judged. If his name is in the book of life, then he will ascend just as Jesus did into heaven. And if his name is not in the book of life, then he must enter into the lake of fire and stay there eternally. So, anyway, our conception of the soul is not like that. The soul, actually this is what it means to be spiritually strong. I was just reflecting on that earlier today. To actually be spiritually strong means to know firmly that I do not depend upon matter in my essence. I mean now, of course. Now we are using matter. The Prophet said we should never become dependent or conditioned, habituated by this matter. That's what it means. Habit is second nature. So to be habituated to matter means to be in Maya. It means to lose one's spiritual strength. It's like this body Krishna calls yantra. Yantra means machine. And sometimes Srila Prabhupada would translate prakriti, material nature, also as machine. Because prakrita in Sanskrit, one meaning of prakrita is manufactured. Something which is prakrita is manufactured. So a machine manufactures things. So prakriti can be taken to mean a machine. So, and this body is a machine of material energy. So, now, how far is this place away from central Gothenburg? 10 kilometers.
15 minutes drive.
10 kilometers, okay. Almost 10 kilometers. Alright, so we use this as an example. Here's one village. You're living in one village here. And I don't know about now, but I suppose years ago it was some kind of farming village. Right? They lived on the land. So, in those days, a couple centuries ago, a few centuries ago, people who lived in the village, who just lived off the land, they were certainly not opulent, material opulent. They did not have very big material resources. So they would grow something, some crops or whatever from the land, or produce things from their own handiwork. And they would have to go to market to sell their goods. Now a few hundred years ago, how would people go to market? Market means Gothenburg. How would they go there? And those who are more wealthy, they might have a wagon pulled by a horse. But actually the common man would just walk. Just walk to market. He'd have his goods, he'd maybe walk with his whole family. And all the family, that's how they used to do things. That's why they used to have big families, because you know, you've got to carry your stuff to market. So the father would be carrying, the mother would be carrying some things. The 5 sons would be carrying things, 5 daughters would be carrying, and then by the time they got to market and set up, they'd have, you know, a whole shop there. Someone would say, "Oh, I'm all right, I'll walk there." Everyone else would look at it like, "What did you say?" I'll walk there. It's only 10 kilometers. Something wrong with him. We think to walk to Gothenburg, wow, you know, what is that? How do we go to Gothenburg? We drive in a car. As you said, 10 minutes. Somebody said 10 minutes. Yeah, 10 minutes by car. No one thinks of walking 10 kilometers today. Now why? Because we have become habituated to using a machine to move from here to Gothenburg, either an automobile or a train or whatever it may be. But everybody has accepted that habit. And thus we've become weak, actually. We've become weak. Now to walk 10 kilometers? Wow. No one can imagine it. But you can read in books that were written even 50 years ago or 75 years ago, not more than 100 years ago. Even then, although they had machines, The old gentlemen, they were accustomed, for their health, they would take long walks. They would get a nice big stick and take long walks in the countryside. Easily, sometimes 10, 20, even 30 kilometers or more. They call it their constitutional walk. Means for their constitution, take a long walk. Very healthy. But people don't do that today. Walk? I'd rather watch TV. You can always find on the television some show where the camera is going down the path through the woods. Or especially here in Sweden, right? They probably have every day, some turn it on and there's you see some Swedish woods scene. And there's someone talking, here's, the speckled trifle bird. And here's the muskrat. Camera's phone. So these things you would see if we went walking, but why go walk? Just turn on the TV, sit there, eat some potato chips, and watch nature through the box. So, in this way we become so weak. So we become addicted to machinery, beginning with the machinery of this body. So this is just an example of how one becomes weak due to association with machines, habituation, dependent upon machines. So similarly, the soul, the spirit soul, becomes weak as it becomes dependent upon the machinery of this body. And how do you become dependent? Because the body makes things, or the machine makes things easier for you, seemingly. Seemingly makes life easier. This is like virtues. We're speaking of virtues. So one virtue is chastity, to be chaste, to not have illicit sex. Another virtue is fortitude, or we would say tapasya. In an uncomfortable situation, as they say, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. You see, in a materially uncomfortable situation, there's some pain, there's some discomfort, but one, again, unflinching. One does not flinch. One does his duty. One is firm. Fortitude means one draws from inner strength. It's like Sankirtan devotees. That's a perfect example. It's cold outside, but they have to distribute Prabhupada's books. How do they do this? They draw an inner strength, spiritual strength. The ordinary people, the habituated people, they immediately look for ways to create a nice warm environment around them. If the Karmis had to go on Christmas marathon, they would devise some kind of, phone booth type box which was all insulated and warm inside and temperature control, humidity control. And it would be situated on one spot, and then there would just be a mechanical arm with a book coming out. And there would be a computerized voice, "Please, sir, take this book." They would think of some way like that. And of course, then it would not be very effective, their book distribution. So how do the Sankirtan devotees do it? By fortitude, by tapas. And this means drawing from their spiritual strength. So these are virtues. To control the senses, even though there's sex agitation. To withstand the discomforts of too much heat or too much cold, etc. So in the modern time, man seeks to substitute these virtues with some mechanical arrangement. Instead of chastity, there's birth control, contraceptives. So you can have the benefit of chastity, because the benefit of chastity is no unwanted population. You see, if you don't have sex, then there's no children, obviously. That's actually the natural form of birth control. But because people are not spiritually strong, therefore by machinery, they try to achieve the same. no children, but you can enjoy the sex life. And again, fortitude, tapasya. If there's some need, if there's if there's some situation which cannot be avoided, which causes pain, then take some drug, take some pill. It's like operation. Or childbirth. This was another reason why there wasn't much illicit sex in the old days. Because childbirth is a pretty heavy thing. Especially if there's no hospital. If there's no antibiotics. You see? Especially if, a woman was bearing a child maybe out in the cow barn somewhere, in the hay, like Mary gave birth to Jesus like that. So, but now, that's a very painful experience, childbirth. Or any type of, an operation or something, it's very painful. But now you just breathe some gas, boom. And then they, it's all over. Oh, thank you. This is the modern. You depend on some machinery, some technological process. So this means we've all become very weak. We've all become very weak. So, but Krishna consciousness, as we're hearing in these verses, to be Krishna conscious, one has to be spiritually strong. Fortunately for us, that doesn't mean we don't have to cut off suddenly, radically, our connection to all machinery. Yes, walk to Gothenburg. No electricity. It doesn't mean that. But what it means is to cultivate the first nature, make the first nature again stronger than the second nature. Actually, second nature habit, as long as you have a material body, it must be there. You cannot avoid the second nature of habit. But what we must do is make the first nature, our spiritual identity, our spiritual qualities, characteristics, stronger than the second nature. Now, the civilization has allowed the habituated, materially habituated nature to completely overcome. They don't even know that there's a soul. It's become so prominent, this addiction to the body and to machinery, technology, which is dedicated to making embodied life so-called easier and easier, but actually makes it, in the end, it increases the distresses that we will have to suffer like anything. It just staves them off for the future. Now by technology, everything apparently is so easy. And in that ease, people commit so many sinful activities for which they will have to pay later on, like anything. So this is the problem. They become so habituated that they've forgotten completely that I am spirit soul, that I will live beyond this body. And I will have to suffer and enjoy the reactions I've generated in this body. This they do not know. They used to know. Even that's in the Christianity of it, as I've explained. So it's a rather primitive kind of belief. This doctrine of zombie-like resurrection of the body and soul, rather primitive. But still they understood that the soul will exist on after death and have to suffer and enjoy what we've done in this human life. And as I mentioned, the Greek philosophers, even before Christianity, they knew this. But now, we've become so ignorant, and yet so puffed up, we think this is the highest development of human civilization in all of history. Not at all. Not at all. This mantra vidya, the science of machine, Prabhupada explained in one talk one conversation, you'll find in the conversation books, that this yantra vidya is the science, the vidya of the demons. And the demons are totally ignorant. To be a demon, asura in Sanskrit, the word asura, asu means this life, ramate, to enjoy. So a demon is one who is dedicated to simply enjoy this life, this body. That's a demon. So his vidya, his knowledge is this yantra vidya, this machine technology. And someone told Srila Prabhupada that in the ancient Greek culture, ancient Greek, very, very old Greek mythology, all the great temples, all the great structures that they used to have in that time were built by demons, they called them titans, equivalent to the Vedic asuras, and the cyclopses, these entities with one eye on the forehead. So they were the ones who built all the big structures. They knew how to do these things. And the people would just live in them. They were built by demons. And Prabhupada said, yes. He said, yes, that was the system. Just like the Pandavas, they got their assembly house from this Mayadana. He built this one assembly house that they had after Arjuna saved him, which was full of all kinds of mystic jugglery, which bewildered Duryodhana. So the demon, this Mayadana, he was a master technician, and he would also build machines for human beings. So now this yantra vidya has become the predominant vidya. And not that we say, oh, this is the science of the demons, so kick it out, it's horrible, and send it back down to the Bila Svarga where it belongs. We'll have nothing to do with that here. Because after all, this is the Kali age, the demigods don't come here. In former ages, the Satyuga, Treta Yuga, so the technology was heavenly, so-called technology. Actually, it's all the virtuous, it was all by virtue of the very harmonious relationship between man and the demigods that was carried out by sacrifice. So the demigods were bestowing upon men everything. So there was no need, there were very, very little need. There was technology. You may know that technology comes from Greek techne, which means a skill or craft, which comes further from Sanskrit takshata, which means carpenter, one who works with wood. So all this technology, so that was Vedic technology, basically woodworking. Which is very simple. And we can use, like this book stand. Nice technology. So in the Vedic times, that was the technology. Everything else was provided by the demigods by dint of yajna. But this is Kali Yuga. That type of yajna is not possible. Our yajna is Sankirtan yajna, which is to get everyone to chant Hare Krishna. Shtane stita shruti gatan manobir. We should hear Shruti Gatan, we should hear about Krishna, Stani Sthita, in our own position. Stani Sthita means stay in your place. So we're not really considering, there's some devotees who are into this, but we're not really considering a crash program to revive all the Vedic sciences. Vedic yajna, so that the demigods will again. That might occur. But actually our consideration is whatever position we're in now, dependent as we are on machinery, we should hear and chant about Krishna because that will make us spiritually strong. And then there's the principle of Yukta Vairagya, Rupa Goswami's principle of engaging whatever our position may be, whatever material facilities we may have. Engage that in Krishna service. But engage it from the position of spiritual strength, real virtue, not becoming habituated. And Prabhupada, he specifically wrote about this. He, like for instance, machinery, farm machinery, he said you can use, but you should not become dependent upon it. That is the point. We have to avoid this. And dependence begins in the mind. When one becomes dependent upon the machinery of material nature, then one is thinking that I am the enjoyer. Because that dependence, that habituation, frees time for what? For the ordinary man, for one who is spiritually weak, for sense enjoyment. So, to become spiritually strong means, yes, you may still go on using machinery, technology in Krishna's service, but the time that it frees for you should not be used in sense gratification. That time should be used in virtuous deeds of devotional service. If our time is freed, then we should attend to Krishna Seva, we should attend to Japa, we should attend to Kirtan, we should attend to preaching. This is the aim of it all. In this way, we will become spiritually strong and we will be able to successfully spread this Sankirtan mission everywhere. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So, questions? Yes?
Why did Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted, was it Rupa Goswami or Sanatana Goswami? He had a very opulent chada, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted him to get rid of that.
Yes, because it was ostentatious. Ostentatious means it was unnecessarily opulent, unnecessarily, just to draw attention. No? It's not that we use opulence. It's not that we shun opulence. But what do we use it for? We use it for Krishna. So if some opulence comes to us that we cannot engage in Krishna's service, then that we should have nothing to do with. Then we should just give it away or whatever. Like I remember many years ago, there was one devotee who received a gift from his parents of a black leather jacket. And he actually became attached to it.
Yeah.
So, what can you use a black leather jacket for in Krishna's service? There is a kind of opulence, for people coming from the hunter class of man. The hunter class wears animal skins and considers himself or herself very beautiful. From the Vedic point of view, this is savagery. This is barbarianism, to walk around, parade around in a fox skin. This is right out of the forest, right out of the jungle. It should just it should become a fashion again, to carry a spear also. These women can go around, in a big mink coat, but they should have a spear. The queen of the hunt. So, in some cultures, a black leather jacket is considered very nice, very opulent. But not in our culture. We have no need for it. So, such an opulent kind of blanket for a sannyasi, a wrap, a chada, which is very flashy. No. For ourselves, we live very simply.
I was wondering, these demigods of the Greeks, were there some other names of the demigods mentioned in the Vedas, or who were these?
No, there's demigods, and there's semi-gods, and there's semi-demigods, and demi-semi-gods.
Were these demigods? Who was speaking about this man who you were talking about now? Socrates. Was he speaking about them or something completely different?
Well, Socrates himself was not very much into demigods. He was a philosopher, but there was a Greek religion, which is you find the elements of this Greek religion in old classical, what they call now mythology, like the Iliad and the Odyssey written by Homer. And there is some connection between also in the functions of the demigods, but also even in the names, like the Greek, the king of the gods is Zeus. So, or the Romans called him Jupiter. So in the Rig Veda, there is a hymn to Dios Pitar, which means the father of heaven. Dios means the sky, and Pitar, Pitri, father. So the father of the sky. But you get the key from scriptures like Rig Veda. Vaishnavacharyas like Madhvacharya have explained the Rig Veda in a completely Vaishnava way. That all of these various hymns, superficially they're to the demigods, but actually they're to Vishnu, who is the shelter of all the demigods. It's like I remember a nice lecture by Achyutananda Maharaj. He was explaining that these names of the demigods are actually names of Krishna. And the demigods themselves, we should actually say Indra Das. The king of heaven, Indra, is actually Indra Das. He's the servant of the real Indra. And one of the 1,000 names of Vishnu is actually Mahendra. So it means Maha Indra. Mahendra put together. So he's the great Indra, or the real Indra. And the king of heaven is only his servant. So just as these Vedic demigods, these principal Vedic demigods, the 33 main demigods, are the Angas of Lord Vishnu. So they also have their Angas. They also have their own servants and expansions. For example, the Kshatriya king, he's called Naradeva. Means he's God, God among men, or among men he's a demigod. And specifically the Vedic Kshatriya represents Indra. So he's like an expansion of Indra, empowered expansion. His power to rule, if he's following the Vedic principles, is coming to him from Indra. It's the same principle of power by which Indra himself, of course it actually comes to him from Vishnu. But since in Vedic culture they worship these demigods, then there was this chain by which it would come down. So, so the Vedic kings, they were for ordinary people, they were demigods. And Prabhupada says the Vedic Kshatriyas were, as I was mentioning in the beginning, they left India and they came to the West. And you can actually find there's a link, or seems to be. I'm not going to declare that in this lecture that this is the final fact, but I'm just saying you can find an evidence of a kind of link. For instance, I'll give an example that you find in Srimad Bhagavatam the sons of Maharaja Yati who were cursed, who had to leave India and settle outside of India, start kingdoms outside of India. So one of these sons is named Anu. And then you look at this Western civilization. Now, you probably all learned in school, you know, they talk of the cradle of civilization, the Tigris-Euphrates river valley, isn't it? Has everyone learned that? In Mesopotamia? You learn that this is, they tell you this is where civilization started. So that civilization starts with a group of people, a tribe or whatever, people, known as the Sumerians, who founded a city called Sumer. And in their religion, they had a patriarchal religion. In other words, the Sumerian people, they traced their genealogy to some person, some forefather who was a demigod. And from them, their whole race came. So it's very interesting that this patriarch of the Sumerians is named Anu. Just a very interesting coincidence. If you read in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there was a king named Anu, son of Maharaja Yatu, who had to leave so many thousands of years ago. He had to leave India, and then when you trace Western civilization to what they consider its root, you know, its beginning, you find it begins with a person named Anu. I'm not saying, you know, don't get me wrong. I'm just offering this as a kind of suggestion, you know. But it's and then when you study the Sumerian, what they know of the Sumerian culture, you find that it has all the elements of Varnashram Dharma in it, and they worship deities, which have even the names of the deities. Some of them you find in the Vedas too. Like one demigoddess Uma, just spelled with another M, U-M-M-A, but she's also mentioned in the Vedas, one of the wives of Lord Shiva. Some of these temples, there was a group in the Middle East also, another group called the Hittites. They're mentioned in the Bible, Old Testament of the Bible, Hittites. And so the scientists, the archaeologists will agree with you that they worshipped Vedic gods. That's known. That's all the site of the Hittite civilization is the sites is in Turkey. It's in Turkey, but they found temples, Hittite temples, thousands of years old, which inscribed on the side were prayers to Indra and Varuna and so on. And they're mentioned in the Bible, the Hittites. So they were worshipping Vedic gods. So the point that I'm making is that these stories from the Western so-called mythology, like the Sumerian mythology or the ancient Greek mythology, we need not try to sprain our brains, or in the Norse mythology too, from here, from Scandinavia. We don't need to twist our brains too much to try to figure out how Indra and Odin, for instance, are the same persons. We don't need to do that at all. Odin may have been some very powerful, ancient king who is coming out of, directly or indirectly, Vedic culture. And he was actually mystically endowed with powers from Indra. He was a kind of representative of Indra among men. It seems to me, you read about Odin, he was a kind of sage who performed austerities, and then he got his power, and then he became a ruler. It seems to me that's more a better way to understand it. And Zeus and Jupiter, because they have histories. There's a cave in the island of Crete where Zeus is supposed to have been born. So I don't think that we'll ever find in the Vedic scriptures any mention of Indra having been born in a cave on a Greek island. Of course it gets, anyway, we also have to understand in those ancient times, heaven extended to earth too. So there are places on earth which were also heavenly, which the demigods would come down. And those places don't have to be just in India. So Olympus, it's a very imposing mountain. Mount Olympus, I've seen. You can actually see it when you drive down from Bulgaria. And you can see it. It's a huge, huge mountain. So we can very well be accepted that demigods used to come down there also in ancient times, because Earth was also a heavenly place. They would even have, just like a rich man has his summer home somewhere, so demigods would even have their homes, perhaps on high mountain peaks on this earthly planet. They have their residence, and they would come, they would be there from time to time. It doesn't mean they're permanent residents. Their permanent residence is in Svargaloka. But they might, for fun, come down here. Yes?
And did they have any contact with these fallen kshatriyas, or this Greek mythology is not true as it is? Because if they were fallen kshatriyas.
As I said, there's a hierarchy of demigods. There's the demigods, the semi-demigods, etc. There's a whole hierarchy. And hierarchy means, just like government. So the policeman is representing the king. Here you have a king. And the policeman, you see, he's also wearing, on his badge, a crown, the Swedish crown. So he has a symbol which